How could my own family hide the truth about my son for almost a year, while I went on believing he was working overseas? When a battered package arrived with my name on it, the real story shattered every lie and set in motion a reckoning my daughter-in-law never saw coming. Can a quiet, underestimated father turn the tables on those who betrayed his trust and his son's future? The kitchen clock showed 7:15 a.m. when I, Franklin Turner, poured my second cup of coffee and stared at my phone for the 100th time this week. Still no direct message from Dean. My son had been overseas for work for almost 10 months now, according to my daughter-in-law Jenna, but something gnawed at my gut like a rusty anchor chain. At 61, I'd spent enough years as a marine engineer to know when someone was feeding me a line of bull. Ships had satellite communication. Even in the most remote waters, crew members could send basic messages home. Yet every piece of information about my boy came filtered through Jenna's carefully rehearsed explanations. "Morning, Franklin." My wife Lillian shuffled into the kitchen, her voice carrying that distant tone she'd adopted since Dean left. "Jenna called last night. Dean's assignment got extended again, something about additional routes in the Pacific." I set down my mug harder than intended. "Extended? That's the third time. What shipping company keeps a merchant marine officer out for 10 months straight without proper shore leave?" Lillian shrugged, already reaching for her purse. "You know how these global contracts work. Dean's making good money. Jenna says the company is very pleased with his performance." "When did you last talk to Dean directly? Franklin, don't start this again." Her tone sharpened. "Jenna handles all the communication. She's his wife. You need to stop acting like some overprotective helicopter parent." The familiar sting of being dismissed settled in my chest. Since Dean married Jenna 3 years ago, I'd gradually been pushed to the margins of my own son's life. Every family decision, every update, every piece of news came through her. And somehow, I'd become the unreasonable one for wanting direct contact with my only child. Later that morning, I drove to Jenna and Dean's apartment complex to drop off some mail that had been delivered to our address by mistake. The building was nicer than I remembered. Fresh paint, new landscaping, clearly expensive. Dean had worked hard to afford this place, taking extra shifts and saving every penny for years, before finally buying it outright last year. Jenna answered the door in designer workout clothes I didn't recognize, her hair perfectly styled despite it being barely 10 a.m. Behind her, I caught glimpses of what looked like a brand new entertainment system and furniture that definitely hadn't been there during my last visit 2 months ago. "Oh, hi, Franklin." She stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind her. "What brings you by?" I held up the mail. "Postal mix-up. These came to our house." "Thanks." She took the envelopes without looking at them. "I was just heading out to meet some friends. Spa day, you know? I need to decompress after managing everything while Dean's away." "Managing everything?" The words came out before I could stop them. "What exactly are you managing, Jenna? Dean's been gone for months. His job covers his expenses overseas." Her laugh had an edge to it. "Franklin, you really don't understand how modern careers work, do you? There's insurance coordination, financial planning, communication scheduling across time zones. I'm basically running a one-woman operation here. I could help with..." "That's sweet, but honestly, you'd probably just complicate things. This isn't like the old days when you could just send a telegram and call it communication." She glanced at her expensive watch. "I really do need to run. The girls are waiting." As I walked back to my truck, her words echoed in my head. The old days, like I was some relic who couldn't understand the modern world. Like 40 years of engineering complex marine systems had taught me nothing about communication or logistics. That evening, Lillian and I joined Jenna for dinner at a restaurant I knew Dean couldn't afford on a merchant marine salary. Jenna ordered wine that cost more than my weekly groceries and spent most of the meal talking about her plans to redecorate the apartment. "Dean's going to love what I've done with the place," she said, cutting into a steak that probably cost $50. "I've completely transformed the living room. New couch, new TV, the works." "That's quite an investment," I said carefully. "Did Dean approve the purchases before you made them?" Jenna's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Franklin, I don't need permission to improve our home. Besides, Dean trusts my judgment completely. He's always said I have better taste than he does." "Of course. But major purchases are handled by the people actually living in the present," Lillian interrupted. "Franklin, you're doing it again, treating grown adults like children." The restaurant suddenly felt too warm. Other diners at nearby tables glanced over as my wife's voice carried. Jenna smirked into her wine glass while I sat there, officially labeled as the out-of-touch patriarch who couldn't mind his own business. "You're right," I said quietly. "I'm sorry for overstepping." But I wasn't sorry. I was confused, frustrated, and increasingly certain that something was very wrong. 3 days later, Lillian sent me to the grocery store with a list of items for some dinner party she was planning. As I loaded bags into my truck in the parking lot, a young man in a delivery uniform approached me hesitantly. "Excuse me, sir. Are you Franklin Turner?" I straightened up, immediately alert. The kid looked nervous, constantly glancing around the parking lot like he was expecting trouble. "Yes, that's me." "Are you Dean's father?" My heart rate spiked. "Yes. Is Dean all right? What's happened?" The delivery driver reached into his van and pulled out a battered package wrapped in what looked like plastic bags and tape. The thing looked like it had traveled through hell to get here. "Then this is for you. Don't give it to anyone." He pressed the package into my hands. "I was told specifically, Dean's father only. Nobody else. And sir?" He lowered his voice. "Be careful who you trust." Before I could ask what he meant, the young man was back in his van and driving away, leaving me standing in a grocery store parking lot, holding a package that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Back home, I locked myself in my garage workshop and examined the package with shaking hands. My name was written in block letters across the front, but underneath, in smaller handwriting that sent a chill straight through me, were the words, "Dad. If you're reading this, they lied to you about everything. Dean." Inside the outer wrapping, I found a waterproof bag containing a USB drive, a handwritten letter on what looked like torn notebook paper, and a photograph that made my knees buckle. The photo showed my son, my strong, healthy boy, looking gaunt and exhausted, standing in what appeared to be some kind of makeshift shelter. His beard was overgrown, his clothes were dirty, and his eyes held a haunted expression I'd never seen before. With trembling fingers, I unfolded the letter. "Dad, if this package reached you, then someone on the crew managed to get word out. I don't know when you'll receive this, or if you'll receive it at all, but I need you to know the truth. I wasn't on a routine shipping assignment. Our vessel was attacked and boarded by pirates off the coast of Somalia 8 months ago. Most of the crew was released after 2 weeks, but they kept the officers as leverage for a larger ransom. The company has been negotiating, but these things take time. What worries me is that Jenna was supposed to tell you what really happened. The shipping company has protocols for family notification in hostage situations. They would have contacted her immediately and provided support. And, Dad, if she told you I was just working overseas, then she's been lying to you for months. I don't know why, but I need you to find out. There's more on the USB drive, a video message I managed to record when the guards weren't watching. I'm scared, Dad. Not just of this place, but of what might be happening at home. Please be careful who you trust. I love you. Dean." My hands were shaking so badly I could barely insert the USB drive into my old laptop. The screen flickered, and then my son's face appeared, thinner than in the photo, speaking in a whisper as he glanced nervously over his shoulder. "Dad, it's me. I don't have much time before they come back. Listen carefully. I've been held captive for 8 months. The company should have told Jenna everything. They have procedures for this. Families get support, compensation, regular updates. If she told you I was just working, then something is very wrong." The video cut out abruptly, leaving me staring at a black screen in my garage, the truth hitting me like a sledgehammer to the chest. For almost 10 months, while I'd been worrying about my son's unusual silence and accepting Jenna's explanations about extended work assignments, Dean had been a prisoner. While Jenna had been buying new furniture and eating expensive dinners, my boy had been fighting for his life in some godforsaken compound. And somehow, everyone in my family had decided I didn't deserve to know the truth. I spent the night in my garage, reading Dean's letter over and over, while memories crashed through my mind like rogue waves. How had I missed the signs? How had I let myself be convinced that everything was normal? The morning Dean left for what I thought was a routine shipping contract, Jenna had been unusually nervous. I'd attributed it to normal worry about her husband being away for several months. But now I remembered how she'd avoided eye contact, how she'd rushed through our goodbye conversation, how she'd immediately started talking about handling things while he was gone. In those first few weeks after Dean's departure, I'd called Jenna regularly to check if she'd heard from him. Her responses had been oddly vague. He's settling into the work routine, or the schedule is keeping him busy. When I asked to speak with Dean directly, she always had an excuse. Time zones, communication blackouts, ship policies about personal calls. Gradually, I'd stopped asking. Lillian had made it clear that my constant questions were putting pressure on Jenna during an already difficult time. I was being the overprotective father again, the old-fashioned man who didn't understand modern work arrangements. But there had been other signs I'd ignored, like how Jenna had suddenly started talking about money differently, mentioning new income streams and better financial planning, or how she'd begun making expensive purchases while claiming Dean was doing so well with his current contract. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in my old friend Ben Harper's law office, the package contents spread across his mahogany desk. Ben had been my friend for over 20 years, and his sharp legal mind had gotten me through my father's estate issues and a few contract disputes during my engineering career. Ben studied the photograph and letter with the same methodical attention he brought to every case. "Franklin, this is serious. If your son was taken hostage and the company followed proper protocols, there would be extensive documentation, compensation payments, regular family briefings, support services." Jenna never mentioned any of that. "Then we need to find out what she did receive." Ben pulled out a legal pad. "Shipping companies carry substantial insurance for these situations. If Dean was held for 8 months, we're talking about significant compensation, both for the family's hardship and for Dean's eventual recovery needs." "You think she's been getting money this whole time?" "I think we need to find out exactly what Oceanic Maritime Solutions has been paying and where that money has been going." Ben made some calls while I sat in his office, watching the city move past his windows. Within 2 hours, he had preliminary information that made my stomach churn. "Franklin, Oceanic Maritime has been paying your daughter-in-law $8,000 per month in family hardship compensation since the incident began. That's in addition to continuing Dean's salary and maintaining his benefits. They've also provided a $50,000 lump sum for psychological counseling and family support services." I did the math in my head. Over 8 months, Jenna had received more than $114,000 in compensation and support funds, money that was supposed to help our family cope with Dean's captivity, money that should have been used for his recovery and our collective trauma, money that had apparently paid for new furniture and expensive dinners while I'd been kept completely in the dark about my son's situation. "There's more," Ben continued. "The company has detailed records of their communication with Mrs. Turner. They've been providing weekly updates on negotiation progress and Dean's condition. She's been fully informed this entire time." That afternoon, I drove back to Dean's apartment complex, this time paying attention to details I'd missed before. The building's amenities, the luxury cars in the parking garage, the high-end shops in the surrounding area. This wasn't just a nice apartment. It was an expensive lifestyle that Dean's normal salary could never have supported. I knocked on the door, and Jenna answered wearing another outfit I'd never seen before. Through the open door, I could see that the living room had been completely transformed since my last visit. Everything was new, modern, and clearly expensive. "Franklin, what are you doing here?" "Oh, I wanted to ask you about Dean's work situation. You mentioned the assignment was extended again." "Right, yes. The company is very pleased with his performance. They've offered him additional routes." She stepped into the hallway again, pulling the door closed. "Is there something specific you needed?" "I was wondering about the communication schedule. It seems unusual that he hasn't been able to call home directly in so long." Jenna's expression shifted slightly. "Franklin, we've been through this. The ship's communication system is prioritized for operational needs. Personal calls are limited and scheduled through the company." "And you're handling all of that scheduling?" "Of course. I'm his emergency contact and next of kin. The company works directly with spouses on these matters." I looked at her carefully manicured nails, her expensive jewelry, her designer handbag. The company must be providing good support for families during these extended assignments. "Support?" She seemed momentarily confused. "Oh, well, yes. They're very professional about keeping families informed." "I meant financial support, compensation for the hardship of having a spouse away for so long." For just a moment, Jenna's composure cracked. "I don't think that's really any of your business, Franklin. Dean and I handle our own finances." "Of course. I just thought, if there were support services available, maybe they could help me understand the communication limitations better." "I really need to get going," she said quickly. "I'm meeting Lillian for shopping. We're looking at cars, actually. Mine has been having problems, and with Dean doing so well, we thought it might be time for an upgrade." After she left, I sat in my truck in the parking lot, pieces of a horrible puzzle clicking into place. The expensive apartment improvements, the designer clothes, the talk of buying a new car, the careful control of all information about Dean. Jenna hadn't just been lying to me about Dean's situation, she'd been profiting from his captivity. That evening, Lillian came home excited about her shopping trip with Jenna. "We found the most beautiful SUV for Jenna," she said, setting down bags from stores I recognized as expensive. "She deserves something nice after managing everything so well while Dean's away." "How is she paying for a new car?" I asked carefully. "Franklin, that's not really our concern. Jenna is very responsible with money. She's been making excellent financial decisions while Dean's been working. What kind of decisions? Lillian set down her purse and looked at me with that familiar expression of patient frustration. Investments, savings, plans. She's been very smart about building their future while Dean's income is so good. His income? The overseas work pays very well. Jenna showed me some of the statements. They're doing much better than we ever did at their age. I wanted to shout. I wanted to shake my wife and tell her that our son was being kept against his will while his wife spent dirty money on luxury items. But I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I understood the full scope of what had been hidden from me. Instead, I excused myself to the garage and called Ben. I need to see those company records, I told him. All of them. Every payment, every communication, every document related to Dean's situation. Franklin, are you sure you want to go down this road? This could tear your family apart. I thought about my son's haunted eyes in that photograph. I thought about 8 months of believing lies while Dean fought for his survival. I thought about Jenna and Lillian shopping for cars with money that was meant to support our family through the worst crisis we'd ever faced. Ben, my family is already torn apart. I just didn't know it yet. The community center's annual charity dinner had always been one of those events I attended out of obligation rather than enthusiasm. But this year, watching Jenna work the room in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension, I felt like I was seeing her clearly for the first time. She moved from table to table with practiced charm, accepting compliments on her appearance and graciously discussing how she'd been holding down the fort while Dean was overseas. To everyone who asked, she painted herself as the devoted wife managing everything single-handedly during her husband's extended work assignment. It's been challenging, I heard her tell Mrs. Patterson from the church auxiliary, but I've really stepped up to handle all the financial planning and household management. You learn what you're capable of when you have to be strong for your family. Mrs. Patterson nodded sympathetically. It must be so difficult with Dean gone for so long. How do you manage? Oh, I've gotten very good at managing everything myself. Honestly, I've discovered I'm much better with money and planning than I ever knew. Dean's going to be amazed at how well I've handled things when he gets back. I sat at my assigned table, pushing food around my plate while Jenna collected praise for her strength and independence. Every compliment felt like a slap in the face. She was being celebrated for managing a crisis that I didn't even know existed, using money that was supposed to help our entire family cope with our son's captivity. Lillian, sitting beside me, beamed with pride. "Isn't Jenna wonderful?" she whispered. "She's really blossomed since taking on more responsibility. Dean is lucky to have such a capable wife." When Jenna returned to our table, flushed with attention and wine, she launched into a detailed description of her latest purchases for the apartment. New artwork, a complete bedroom set, professional cleaning services. She spoke about these improvements as if they were investments in the family's future, smart decisions that demonstrated her financial acumen. "The key," she said, gesturing with her wine glass, "is understanding that you have to spend money to build the kind of life you want. Dean's income has given us opportunities, and I've been strategic about taking advantage of them." "Strategic," I repeated. "Exactly. Men like—" She paused, glancing at me with a slight smile. "Well, older men especially tend to be too conservative with money. They don't understand that sometimes you have to invest in quality of life. They just want to hoard everything in savings accounts." Several people at nearby tables chuckled. I realized that my reputation as the overly cautious, old-fashioned father-in-law had become part of Jenna's narrative. I was the stick in the mud who didn't understand modern financial planning, while she was the savvy young woman making smart decisions for her family's future. "Franklin's always worried about money," Lillian added with an indulgent laugh. "He still thinks we're living in the 1980s when it comes to spending." More laughter, more knowing nods. I was the evening's comic relief, the out-of-touch patriarch whose concerns could be safely dismissed. But as I watched Jenna accept congratulations for her financial wisdom, I thought about the documents Ben had shown me that afternoon. Bank statements showing regular deposits from Oceanic Maritime Solutions, transfer records revealing how that money had been moved into personal accounts, purchase receipts for items that had nothing to do with family crisis management or Dean's eventual recovery. The next morning, I drove to the First National Bank branch, where Dean had maintained his accounts since college. I'd helped him open his first savings account there when he was 16, and the manager, Patricia Voss, had known our family for years. "Mr. Turner," Patricia said as she led me to her office. "I was so sorry to hear about Dean's situation. Mrs. Turner mentioned that he's been overseas for quite some time." "Yes, his work assignment has been extended." I chose my words carefully. "I'm trying to get a better understanding of the family's financial situation. As Dean's father, I want to make sure everything is being handled properly." Patricia nodded sympathetically. "Of course. Though I should mention, Mrs. Turner has been managing the accounts very actively. She's made several significant transfers and withdrawals over the past few months." "Transfers to where?" "Primarily to a joint account she opened with your wife, actually, and there have been substantial withdrawals for various purchases. Mrs. Turner mentioned they were investments in the family's future." My pulse surged. "Lillian has a joint account with Jenna?" "Oh, yes. They opened it about 6 months ago. Mrs. Turner, your wife, mentioned that they were coordinating some family financial planning while Dean was away." I left the bank with copies of account statements that painted a clear picture of systematic deception. Not only had Jenna been receiving substantial compensation from Dean's company, but she'd been sharing that money with my wife. They'd been partners in this betrayal from the beginning. The statements showed regular transfers to accounts in both women's names. Car payments for vehicles I'd never seen, credit card payments for charges at high-end stores and restaurants, spa services, vacation bookings, even payments to a financial advisor who was apparently helping them optimize their investment strategy. That afternoon, I sat alone on a bench in Riverside Park, the place where I'd brought Dean to feed ducks when he was small. The autumn air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched under the feet of joggers and dog walkers who passed by. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that my entire family had been living a lie for almost a year. I thought about my father, who'd passed away when Dean was 10. Dad had been a Navy man, old school in every way, but he'd taught me something that had stuck with me through 4 decades of marriage and parenthood. Don't let them trample your name, son. A man's reputation is all he really owns in this world. For months, I'd let myself be painted as the overprotective, out-of-touch father who didn't understand modern life. I'd accepted being dismissed and marginalized because I thought it was better to keep peace in the family. I'd let them trample my name because I believed that family harmony was more important than my dignity. But family harmony built on lies wasn't harmony at all. It was just elaborate theater designed to keep me in the dark while my son suffered and my trust was exploited. I pulled out my phone and called Ben. "I'm ready to do this by the book," I told him. "Whatever it takes. I want every record, every receipt, every document that shows what they've done. And I want to know exactly what legal options we have." "Franklin, are you sure? Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your relationship with Lillian and Jenna will never be the same." I watched a father push his young daughter on a swing, both of them laughing as she soared higher with each push. "Ben, my relationship with them is already destroyed. I just didn't know it yet." 2 hours later, I received a calendar invite from Ben's office. Strategy session, assets and legal rights. The meeting was scheduled for the following morning, and the agenda included items like compensation recovery, asset tracing, and fraud documentation. As I sat in my truck outside the park, I realized that for the first time in almost a year, I felt like I had a purpose. Not the purpose of being a convenient scapegoat for family dysfunction, but the real purpose of fighting for my son and reclaiming what had been stolen from our family. Tomorrow, Ben and I would begin building the case that would expose everything. But tonight, I had to go home and sit across the dinner table from my wife and daughter-in-law, pretending I didn't know that they'd been betraying me and my son for months. The hardest part wasn't the anger. The hardest part was realizing that I'd been living with strangers who wore the faces of people I loved. Ben's law office felt different during our strategy session. The morning light streaming through his windows illuminated stacks of documents that represented months of deception, and for the first time since receiving Dean's package, I felt like I was moving from victim to advocate. "The evidence is overwhelming," Ben said, spreading financial records across his conference table. "Oceanic Maritime Solutions has been exemplary in their handling of this crisis. They've documented every payment, every communication, every service offered to the family." He handed me a thick folder. "Your daughter-in-law has received $68,000 in direct family hardship payments over 8 months. Dean's salary has continued at $4,200 per month, deposited directly into their joint account. There was a $50,000 lump sum for psychological counseling and family support services, plus a $25,000 emergency fund for unexpected expenses related to Dean's captivity." I did the math. Over $180,000 in compensation and support, none of which had been used for its intended purpose. The company also offered family counseling services, regular briefings with a family liaison specialist, and connection with other families who've gone through similar situations, Ben continued. Mrs. Turner declined all of these services, stating that the family preferred to handle things privately. She declined family counseling? According to their records, she told them that you and your wife were coping well and didn't need additional support. She specifically requested that all communication go through her exclusively to minimize stress on the extended family. The betrayal cut deeper with every detail. Jenna hadn't just stolen money. She'd stolen our right to know what was happening to Dean, our right to support him through this crisis, and our right to receive help processing our own trauma. What about the company's communication protocols? I asked. Ben flipped through another set of documents. They've been sending weekly updates to Mrs. Turner about negotiation progress, Dean's health status, and estimated timelines for resolution. She's been fully informed about every development, including when he might be released. Franklin, according to these records, the company informed her 3 days ago that Dean's release was imminent. The final ransom payment was processed, and they expected him to be freed within 24 to 48 hours. My hands started shaking. Dean might already be free? It's possible. The company's last communication to Mrs. Turner was yesterday, confirming that Dean and the remaining hostages were en route to a secure location for medical evaluation and debriefing. I sat back in my chair, overwhelmed by the possibility that my son might already be safe while I was still discovering the scope of his wife's deception. We need to find out if he's been released. I'm already working on that. But Franklin, we need to discuss what happens next. If Dean is free, he's going to discover what's been done with the compensation money. He's going to learn that his father was kept in the dark about his captivity. This is going to devastate him. What are our legal options? Ben pulled out a legal pad covered with notes. Fraud, definitely. Possibly theft, depending on how the compensation was legally structured, civil recovery of misappropriated funds. And if Dean bought the apartment before his captivity, we can argue that any mortgage payments made with compensation funds give him additional equity claims. The apartment, I said, remembering something. Dean bought that place outright last year, paid cash from his savings. If Jenna's been making improvements with compensation money, then those improvements technically belong to Dean, and any claims she might have to the property could be compromised by her misuse of funds intended for his recovery. We spent the next 2 hours going through every document, building a timeline of deception that stretched back to the very beginning of Dean's captivity. The evidence was damning. Jenna had known everything, received substantial support, and chosen to lie to our family while spending money meant for Dean's recovery on luxury items and personal expenses. At 2 p.m., Ben's phone rang. He answered with his professional voice, but his expression changed as he listened. Yes, I understand. Thank you for calling immediately. He hung up and looked at me with a mixture of relief and concern. That was Oceanic Maritime. Dean has been released. He's currently at a medical facility in Djibouti for evaluation, but he's safe and in good health. They expect him to be flown back to the U.S. within the next 48 hours. I felt tears I didn't know I'd been holding back. My son was alive and free. But the relief was immediately complicated by the realization that Dean would soon discover what had happened in his absence. They're going to contact Mrs. Turner to coordinate his return, Ben continued. This is where things get complicated, Franklin. Dean is going to learn about the compensation payments. He's going to ask questions about how that money was used and why his family wasn't informed about his situation. Good. He deserves to know the truth. But are you prepared for what that truth might do to your family? This isn't just about money, Franklin. This is about fundamental betrayal of trust. When Dean learns that his wife lied about his captivity while spending his compensation money and that his stepmother was complicit, I thought about that for a long moment. Ben, my family has been destroyed for months. I just didn't know it. At least now we can start dealing with reality instead of lies. That evening, I sat in my garage workshop, organizing the evidence Ben had given me. Financial records, communication logs, legal precedents for compensation recovery. Everything was methodically arranged in folders, each document copied and filed according to Ben's instructions. This was familiar work for me. As a marine engineer, I'd spent decades creating detailed documentation for complex systems. Every component had to be cataloged, every connection mapped, every potential failure point identified. Now I was applying the same methodical approach to documenting the failure of my family. Around 9 p.m., Lillian knocked on the garage door. Franklin, you've been out here for hours. Dinner's ready. I'll be in shortly. What are you working on? You've had papers spread out all day. I looked at my wife through the doorway, this woman I'd been married to for 35 years, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Just some old engineering projects, trying to organize my files. She nodded and went back inside, apparently satisfied with the lie. It occurred to me that I was now lying to my family, just as they'd been lying to me. But there was a difference. My lies were temporary, designed to protect evidence until the truth could be properly revealed. Their lies had been designed to exploit and deceive indefinitely. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Dad, it's Dean. I'm safe. They're flying me home tomorrow. I'll call you as soon as I can. I love you. I stared at the message, my hands trembling again. My son was coming home. He was safe, and very soon he was going to learn what his wife and stepmother had done while he fought for his life in captivity. I typed back, "Thank God you're safe. I love you too. We have a lot to talk about." His response came immediately. "Dad, something's wrong. The company told me about the compensation payments to Jenna. Did you know about any of this?" I sat in my garage, surrounded by evidence of months of deception, and typed the hardest message I'd ever sent. "Son, I didn't know about your captivity until 3 days ago. I'll explain everything when you get home." The phone rang immediately. Dean's voice, weak but unmistakably angry. "What do you mean you didn't know about my captivity?" "Dean, your wife told us you were working overseas. Extended assignment. I had no idea what really happened until someone delivered a package with your letter and photo." The silence stretched for almost a minute. When Dean spoke again, his voice was barely controlled. "Dad, are you telling me that Jenna never told you I was taken hostage? That she's been lying to you for 8 months?" "Yes." Another long pause. "The company says they've paid her over $180,000 in compensation and support funds. They've been sending weekly updates about my condition and the negotiation progress." "I know, I've seen the records." "Dad, what has she done with that money?" I looked at the financial statements spread across my workbench. "We'll discuss everything when you get home, son. But Dean, I'm glad you're safe, and I want you to know that I never stopped worrying about you. Something felt wrong from the beginning." "Dad, I need you to do something for me. Don't tell Jenna that we've talked. Don't tell her that I know about the compensation money. Can you do that?" "Of course. But why?" "Because I want to see what she says when I come home. I want to hear her explanation before she knows that I know the truth." After we hung up, I sat in my garage for another hour, thinking about the conversation I'd just had. My son was safe, but he was also angry in a way I'd never heard before. He'd spent 8 months in captivity, probably dreaming about coming home to his family, only to discover that his wife had been profiting from his suffering while lying to his father. Tomorrow, Dean would be home. Within days, maybe hours, the truth would come out. And then we would see what remained of our family after almost a year of deception. I looked at the evidence folders one more time, thinking about my father's advice about not letting them trample your name. Tomorrow, I would start the process of reclaiming not just my name, but my son's future and our family's integrity. The reckoning was coming, and I was ready for it. Dean arrived home on a Thursday morning while Jenna was at her weekly yoga class. I'd been waiting in my truck outside the airport since 6 a.m., and when I saw my son walking through the arrival gate, I barely recognized him. He was thinner than in the photo he'd sent. His clothes hung loose on his frame, and there was a hardness in his eyes that hadn't been there before his captivity. But when he saw me, his face broke into the first genuine smile I'd seen in almost a year. "Dad." He wrapped me in a hug that lasted a full minute. "God, it's good to see you." "Welcome home, son. Are you okay? Do you need to see a doctor?" "The company doctors cleared me medically. Physically, I'm fine. Everything else?" He shrugged. "We'll see." During the drive back to my house, Dean told me about his captivity in careful, controlled sentences. The initial attack on the ship, the weeks of uncertainty, the gradual realization that the situation was more serious than anyone had initially thought. He spoke about it like an engineer describing a technical problem, factual, methodical, keeping emotion out of his voice. "The hardest part wasn't the conditions," he said as we pulled into my driveway. "It was not knowing what was happening at home, not knowing if my family was okay, if they were getting support, if they even knew what had happened to me. Dean, I'm sorry. If I had known... Dad, this isn't your fault. You were lied to. The question is why." We went inside, and I showed Dean the evidence I'd compiled with Ben's help. Financial records, communication logs, purchase receipts. He went through everything with the same methodical attention he brought to his engineering work, but I could see his anger building with each document. $180,000, he said finally. "She received $180,000 in compensation for my captivity, and instead of telling you what happened, she spent it on furniture and cars and spa treatments." "The apartment improvements alone cost over $40,000, I said. "And according to the bank records, she and your stepmother bought 2 new cars with the money." Dean looked up from the papers. "Lillian knew?" "They opened a joint account 6 months ago. They've been partners in this from the beginning." My son sat back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. 8 months, Dad. I spent 8 months in that place, thinking about coming home to my wife and my family. thinking about how worried you must be, how hard this must be for everyone. And all that time, Jenna was shopping with dirty money while you didn't even know I was in danger. What do you want to do? Dean looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, and utterly determined. I want my life back, Dad. I want the apartment I bought with my own money. I want the compensation money that was meant for my recovery, and I want everyone to know exactly what she did. The legal process could take months. Then we'd better get started. He stood up. But first, I want to see what Jenna says when I walk through the door. I want to hear her explain where she's been getting the money for all these improvements. We spent the afternoon going over the legal strategy Ben had outlined. Asset recovery, fraud charges, civil restitution. Dean signed affidavits detailing his captivity and his lack of knowledge about the compensation payments. He provided statements about his purchase of the apartment and his expectations for how his family would be supported during a crisis. The apartment is the key, Ben explained when he came by the house that evening. Dean bought it outright with his own savings. Any improvements made with compensation money technically belong to him. And if we can prove that Jenna misrepresented her authority to make those improvements, we can force her to return the property and repay the misused funds, Dean finished. I understand. When can we file? I can have the paperwork ready by Monday. But Dean, are you sure you want to go through with this? This will destroy your marriage. Dean looked at the financial records spread across my dining room table. My marriage was destroyed the moment she decided to profit from my captivity while lying to my father. I'm just making it official. That evening, Dean called Jenna and told her he was back in the country. I listened from the kitchen as he spoke to his wife for the first time in 8 months, his voice carefully neutral. Yes, I'm fine. The assignment ran longer than expected, but it's finished now. I'm at my dad's house. I thought I'd spend the night here and come home tomorrow. No, everything's fine. I just wanted to catch up with Dad first. When he hung up, Dean looked at me with grim satisfaction. She didn't ask about my health, didn't ask about the work conditions or why the assignment took so long. The first thing she wanted to know was when I'd be home to see all the improvements she's made to the apartment. What did she say about the improvements? That she's been very strategic with our finances while I was away. That I'm going to be amazed at how well she's managed everything. Dean's voice was bitter. She's excited to show me what she's accomplished. Friday morning, I drove Dean to his apartment complex. He'd asked me to come with him, partly for moral support, and partly as a witness to whatever conversation was about to happen. Just remember, I said as we walked to the building entrance, she doesn't know that you know about the compensation money. She doesn't know that I know about your captivity. I understand. I want to see how far she'll take the lie. Jenna answered the door wearing a new dress I'd never seen before, her hair and makeup perfect despite it being barely 9 a.m. When she saw Dean, her face lit up with what looked like genuine excitement. Baby, welcome home. She threw her arms around him, and I watched my son's face remain carefully neutral as he returned the hug. It's good to be back. Come in, come in. I have so much to show you. She pulled Dean into the apartment, and I followed behind them, taking in the dramatic changes since my last visit. The entire living space had been transformed. New furniture, new electronics, new artwork, new everything. The place looked like it had been professionally decorated, and I estimated the cost of the improvements at well over $50,000. What do you think? Jenna asked, practically bouncing with excitement. I've completely redone everything. New couch, new dining set, new bedroom furniture. And wait until you see the kitchen. I had the countertops replaced and got all new appliances. Dean walked through the apartment slowly, taking in every expensive detail. This must have cost a fortune. It was an investment in our future, Jenna said proudly. I've been very smart about managing our finances while you were away. Your overseas work paid so well that I was able to really improve our quality of life. My overseas work? The shipping assignment. The company was very generous with the compensation for such a long deployment. I watched Dean's face carefully. He was giving Jenna every opportunity to tell him the truth, and she was doubling down on the lie instead. What kind of compensation? Dean asked. Hazard pay, extended assignment bonuses, that sort of thing, plus your regular salary, of course. I've been very strategic about investing it in improvements that will benefit us long term. Dean nodded slowly. And you handled all the communication with the company? Of course. They worked directly with me as your emergency contact. Very professional organization. Jenna beamed at him. I think they were impressed with how well I managed everything. I'm sure they were. For the next hour, Jenna gave Dean a detailed tour of every improvement she'd made, explaining her reasoning for each purchase and highlighting how much money she'd saved through smart shopping. She spoke about the apartment renovations like they were proof of her business acumen, evidence that she could be trusted with major financial decisions. Dean listened to everything with polite interest, asking occasional questions about costs and timing. To anyone watching, he might have seemed pleased with his wife's initiative, but I could see the cold fury building behind his eyes. Oh, finally, Jenna led us back to the living room, where she'd prepared coffee and pastries from an expensive bakery. "So," she said, settling onto the new couch with obvious satisfaction, "what do you think? Are you proud of how I've managed everything?" Dean sat across from her, and for a moment, I thought he might reveal everything right then. Instead, he smiled and said, "I think you've been very creative with our finances." "I knew you'd be impressed. Your father was worried about the spending, but I told him that men his age don't understand modern financial planning." "My father was worried?" "Oh, you know how he is. Always asking questions about money and communication schedules. I had to explain that these overseas assignments work differently than they did in his day." Dean glanced at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. "What did you tell him about my assignment?" "Just that you were working overseas on an extended contract, that the company kept you very busy and communication was limited." Jenna waved her hand dismissively. "He was being overly protective, as usual." "I see." Dean stood up. "Well, I should probably get going. I have some things to take care of." "Already, but you just got back. I thought we could spend the day together." "Tomorrow," Dean said. "I need to check in with the company today, handle some paperwork from the assignment." As we walked back to my truck, Dean was quiet until we were out of earshot of the building. Then he turned to me with an expression of absolute resolve. "Did you hear that, Dad? She had every chance to tell me the truth, and instead she lied directly to my face. She's proud of what she's done. She thinks she's been clever." "Dean." "No, Dad. I'm done. Monday morning, we file every piece of paperwork Ben has prepared. I want the apartment back. I want every penny of compensation money accounted for, and I want everyone to know exactly what kind of person I was married to." That weekend, Dean stayed at my house while we finalized the legal strategy. He spent hours in my garage, going through evidence and preparing his testimony. The methodical approach seemed to help him process what had happened, giving him a sense of control after months of powerlessness. Sunday evening, Ben came by with the final paperwork. "The court date is set for Tuesday morning," he said. "Family court, Judge Patricia Hendricks presiding. It's a public hearing, so anyone can attend." "Good," Dean said. "I want this to be public. I want everyone who congratulated Jenna on her financial management to know where that money really came from." Monday morning, I woke up early and found Dean already awake, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and the legal documents spread in front of him. "You ready for this?" I asked. He looked up at me with calm determination. "Dad, I've been ready for this since I read your letter in that compound. The only difference is now I have the power to do something about it." At 9 a.m., we met Ben at the courthouse. The hearing was scheduled for 10 a.m., and Ben had arranged for all the evidence to be presented systematically: financial records, communication logs, Dean's testimony about his captivity, and my testimony about being deceived. "Remember," Ben said as we walked into the courthouse, "this isn't just about money. This is about fraud, breach of trust, and misappropriation of funds intended for crisis support. The judge needs to understand that this wasn't just poor financial decisions, this was deliberate deception." As we approached the courtroom, I saw Jenna and Lillian waiting in the hallway with their lawyer. Jenna looked confused and slightly annoyed, like this was an inconvenience she hadn't expected. Lillian looked nervous, which told me she understood the seriousness of the situation better than her co-conspirator. When Jenna saw Dean, she approached with a bright smile. "What's all this about? Your lawyer called about some kind of financial review?" Dean looked at his wife with an expression of perfect calm. "You'll find out in a few minutes." At exactly 10 a.m., we entered the courtroom. Judge Hendricks was a woman in her 50s with a reputation for thorough attention to detail and little patience for deception. The courtroom was fuller than I'd expected. Word had apparently gotten around about the nature of the case. As I took my seat in the witness section, I thought about my father's advice one more time. Don't let them trample your name. Today, we would reclaim not just our names, but our family's integrity and my son's future. The reckoning had arrived, and I was ready to watch it unfold. Judge Patricia Hendricks called the courtroom to order at precisely 10:15 a.m., and I could feel the tension in the air as family members, friends, and even some community members who'd heard about the case settled into their seats. Jenna sat at the defendant's table with her lawyer, still looking more annoyed than concerned, while Lillian fidgeted nervously beside her. "This is a civil action regarding misappropriation of crisis compensation funds and fraud," Judge Hendricks announced. "Mr. Harper, you may present your opening statement." Ben stood with the confidence of a man who held an unbeatable hand. "Your Honor, This case involves the systematic deception of a family during one of the most traumatic experiences possible, the hostage situation of their son and husband. While Dean Turner fought for his life in captivity for 8 months, his wife deliberately concealed his situation from his family while misappropriating over $180,000 in compensation funds intended for family support and his eventual recovery. I heard gasps from the gallery. Several people I recognized from the community center dinner leaned forward in their seats. Ben continued, "The evidence will show that Mrs. Jenna Turner not only lied to her father-in-law about her husband's captivity, but actively prevented him from accessing support services while using compensation money for personal luxury purchases. Furthermore, we will demonstrate that Mrs. Lillian Turner was complicit in this deception, participating in the misuse of funds while helping to maintain the lie that kept Dean's father in the dark about his son's situation." Jenna's lawyer, a nervous-looking man who clearly hadn't expected such damning evidence, stood for his response. "Your Honor, my client was under tremendous stress during her husband's absence and made financial decisions she believed were in the family's best interest." Judge Hendricks held up her hand. "Mr. Harper, please present your evidence." What followed was a methodical destruction of 8 months of lies. Ben presented the evidence in chronological order, building an irrefutable case of deliberate deception and financial fraud. First came the communication records from Oceanic Maritime Solutions. Ben read aloud from the company's detailed logs showing weekly updates sent to Jenna about Dean's condition, negotiation progress, and available family support services. Mrs. Turner was informed of her husband's captivity on day 1, Ben stated. She was offered family counseling, regular briefings, and connection with other families in similar situations. She declined all support services and specifically requested that no other family members be contacted. The courtroom was completely silent. I could see people in the gallery turning to look at Jenna with expressions of disbelief. Next came the financial records. Ben methodically detailed every compensation payment, every transfer to personal accounts, and every luxury purchase made with money intended for crisis support. $68,000 in family hardship payments, Ben announced, used for apartment renovations, designer clothing, and spa services. Dean Turner's continued salary of $4,200 per month, used for luxury car purchases and entertainment expenses, a $50,000 lump sum for psychological counseling and family support, used for vacation bookings and high-end shopping. With each revelation, I watched Jenna's composure crack a little more. She kept glancing at the gallery, seeing the horrified expressions of people who had congratulated her on her financial management and strength during difficult times. Then Ben called Dean to testify. My son walked to the witness stand with the bearing of a man who had survived hell and returned to find his trust betrayed. His voice was calm and clear as he described his 8 months in captivity, the uncertainty about his family's well-being, and his shock at discovering how his compensation had been misused. "I spent every day wondering if my family was okay," Dean testified. "I worried about my father especially. Knowing how much he'd worry about me, I thought about the financial stress my captivity might put on everyone, and I was grateful that the company had support systems in place to help them cope." Judge Hendricks leaned forward. "Mr. Turner, when did you learn that your family had not been informed of your situation?" 3 days ago, Your Honor, when I called my father from the medical facility in Djibouti and learned that he'd only discovered my captivity when someone managed to get a message to him." "And when did you learn about the compensation payments?" "At the same time. The company told me they'd been providing substantial support to my wife, and when I asked my father about it, he had no idea what I was talking about." The impact of Dean's testimony was devastating. I could see people in the gallery wiping away tears, and several community members who had praised Jenna's strength now looked sick to their stomachs. Ben then called me to the stand. I testified about the months of lies, the deliberate exclusion from information about my son, and the systematic deception that had kept me from supporting Dean during his captivity. "For 8 months, I believed my son was working overseas," I said, looking directly at Jenna. "I worried about his unusual silence, but I was told I was being overprotective. I was made to feel foolish for wanting direct contact with my child. While I was being dismissed as an out-of-touch father, my son was fighting for his life, and compensation meant to help our family was being spent on luxury items," Judge Hendricks asked. "Mr. Turner, did you ever suspect that you weren't being told the truth?" "Something felt wrong from the beginning, Your Honor, but I trusted my family. I believed that if there was a crisis, they would tell me. I never imagined that my own wife and daughter-in-law would deliberately hide something like this." The final blow came when Ben presented evidence of Lillian's involvement. Bank records showing the joint account, receipts for luxury car purchases, and documentation proving that my wife had been a full partner in the deception. Mrs. Lillian Turner wasn't just complicit in the lie, Ben stated. She was an active participant in the misappropriation of funds. She helped open accounts, made purchases with compensation money, and actively discouraged her husband from asking questions about their son's situation. When Jenna's lawyer tried to present their defense, it crumbled immediately under the weight of evidence. He attempted to argue that Jenna had been under stress and made poor decisions, but Judge Hendricks cut him off. Counsel, stress does not explain 8 months of systematic deception and fraud. Your client didn't make poor decisions. She made deliberate choices to lie to her family while misappropriating funds intended for crisis support. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. In the matter of property recovery, I find that the apartment purchased by Dean Turner with his personal savings remains his sole property. Any improvements made with misappropriated compensation funds are considered part of his rightful assets. Mrs. Jenna Turner has no claim to the property and must vacate within 30 days. Jenna's face went white. The apartment had been her symbol of financial success, her proof that she could manage money better than the men in her family. In the matter of financial restitution, Judge Hendricks continued, Mrs. Jenna Turner is ordered to repay $143,000 in misused compensation funds to Mr. Dean Turner within 90 days. Mrs. Lillian Turner is ordered to repay $37,000, representing her share of misappropriated funds used for luxury purchases. The numbers hit the courtroom like physical blows. I heard someone in the gallery whisper, "Oh my God, she spent that much?" Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for potential criminal fraud charges. The deliberate deception of family members during a crisis situation, combined with the misappropriation of substantial compensation funds, may warrant criminal prosecution. Jenna finally broke. She stood up at the defendant's table, her voice shaking with anger and desperation. "This isn't fair. I was alone for 8 months. I had to handle everything by myself. I deserved that money." The outburst sealed her fate. Judge Hendricks looked at her with cold disapproval. "Mrs. Turner, you were not alone. You chose to be alone by lying to your family and refusing support services. You did not deserve money that was intended for your husband's recovery and your family's crisis support." As the judge's gavel fell with finality, I watched Jenna and Lillian sit in stunned silence, the full weight of their exposure and humiliation settling over them. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations as community members who had praised Jenna's financial wisdom now understood exactly where that wisdom had come from. Dean stood at the plaintiff's table, looking at me across the courtroom. He mouthed the words, "Thank you," and I felt a sense of justice that I hadn't experienced since opening that battered package in a grocery store parking lot. Ben gathered the signed court orders with professional satisfaction. "Full restitution, property recovery, and potential criminal charges," he said quietly. "Complete victory." As we prepared to leave the courtroom, I looked one last time at Jenna and Lillian, sitting at their table in defeat. They had trampled my name, betrayed my trust, and profited from my son's suffering. Now they faced financial ruin, public humiliation, and possible criminal prosecution. Franklin Turner collected the court documents that would restore his son's life and walked out of the courthouse, leaving his betrayers to face the consequences of their greed and deception.